What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Sullivan, and wee woo, emergency Pick Six podcast because we have a blockbuster of all blockbusters coming across the NFL ticker. The Houston Texans and the Buffalo Bills have pulled off a trade that will send four-time Pro Bowl wide receiver Stefon Diggs to Houston. The parameters of this trade, per Jonathan Jones, the Texans are sending over a 2025 second round pick, which is the Vikings pick that in part they acquired in that deal earlier this offseason. Meanwhile, Houston gets Stefon Diggs, a 2024 sixth rounder, and a 2025 fifth rounder. Join me to break this all down is our NFL draft expert, Josh Edwards. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing a lot better now that you did the emergency siren so that I didn't have to. That's the one thing that we're missing from having Breach on here today, so I'm glad you took care of that.
Well, you know what? We got Brinson scuba diving on some sort of vacation, or maybe he's just scuba diving for fun. And then this is Breach's normal day off. So you knew something crazy was going to go down. But boy, this one is a doozy on a multitude of different levels. First, let's look at it from the Buffalo Bills side of things. It's pretty interesting to see how quickly this deteriorated between Stefon Diggs and the Bills organization. The writing was kind of on the wall over the last, I would say, year or so. I mean, you can go back to incidents between Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs kind of arguing on the sidelines, having heated discussions. Go back to the start of mandatory minicamp last year where he wasn't there, and there was kind of some weird comments made by head coach Sean McDermott. And then just fast forward to last night, you have Robert Griffin III asking the question of whether or not Stefon Diggs is essential to Josh Allen's success. And then you have a commenter saying, does Josh benefit from having a top tier wide receiver? Yes. Is he essential to his success? No. And Stefon Diggs responds to that tweet and says, you sure? Question mark. So that is really the final note here for Stefon Diggs as a member of the Buffalo Bills. I don't know if this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, but I do think that this certainly doesn't help the situation. And it just felt like things were off between Diggs and Allen, Diggs and the organization. So when you kind of look back at this, what do you think went wrong here?
Well, it's been clear that they're on different pages over the past couple of years. It's one of the worst kept secrets in the NFL. It seems like we've been talking about this for the past three off seasons. So for it to come to a head in this manner, I don't think it's all that surprising. I will say, from Buffalo's perspective, it is unique because you are in a title window to move on from a productive player like Stefon Diggs, who has made so many essential plays in that offense. It's a little bit, I won't say concerning, but it is noteworthy because of all the other voices that they've gotten rid of in that locker room this offseason. Jordan Poyer is gone. They've just had this, they've pulled more talent out of that roster than they put into it thus far. So for a team that has those Super Bowl aspirations, it's a little bit concerning. Everybody wants to talk about his age, his contract, all that stuff. I get it. But I don't think Buffalo would have been motivated to make this move if they did not feel there was a little bit of discourse between the organization and maybe more specifically Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs.
You look at it from the start of last year, you go through the first 6 weeks of the season, you're thinking, okay, maybe all of this, the hubbub was just all to do about nothing because Diggs was balling. He had over 100 yards in 5 of his first 6 games, but then things really started to drop off. Didn't touch 100 yards receiving for the rest of the season, averaged just 51.2 receiving yards per game, really seemed to be out of sync with Josh Allen. And I do think that you point to something that's interesting. On top of just kind of like losing veteran talent, like you talk about Poyer, I almost really am surprised that the Bills didn't land on their feet a little bit better here with Stefon Diggs. And what I mean by that is they didn't really prepare for this, even though you and I, and it seemed like everybody was noticing this deteriorating relationship over the last few years. Sure, they draft Dalton Kincaid in the first round. That certainly will help as they move forward. But you let Gabe Davis go in free agency. You haven't really addressed wide receiver too much. I know they signed Mac Hollins, and I think they brought in a few other guys, but you look at that position group, the cupboard's really bare. And so, they acquire a second round pick. You look at their draft capital this cycle now. They have the number 28 overall pick, number 60 overall. Is there a wide receiver, or are there a couple of wide receivers in that range that would make sense? Or is this a team that needs to kind of trade up to get one of those bona fide studs to replace Diggs?
Well, that's the important question because Stefon Diggs is not easily replaced. He's not somebody that will probably be replaced by someone that is available at number 28 overall. If they were to trade up in this draft, maybe they get an opportunity to select one of those top three wide receivers. But even then, I think you have to get all the way up into the top 10 overall to even have a shot at a guy like Roma Dunze, who's probably going to be the third wide receiver taken, I would imagine, of that trio at the top. I don't see him getting past Chicago at number 9 overall. So you have to get all the way up there if you want. Those guys are gone. How desperate does Buffalo become? Do you want to move up to number 12 and try to get Brian Thomas Jr., who's kind of considered the best of the rest at that point? Or do you wait and see how the draft plays out? I think Buffalo's approach to this is going to be very interesting because once that top tier is gone, it may be 20-ish before we see another wide receiver taken. He could go number 16 overall. It's hard to say, but the type of talent that will be available at number 28 overall, you're probably talking about A.D. Mitchell from Texas, who's a little bit of a taller, he's explosive, but somebody that's still kind of a vision on the football field as much as he is a finished product. So I think you have to be patient with him. So that's where it's difficult to say anybody is going to step into Stefon Diggs' shoes. You're either going to take a guy that you probably have to be patient with, or you take, a couple flyers in this draft class. Maybe you don't just take somebody in the first round. Maybe you take somebody else on day 2, or you take a couple of guys on day 2 and target a different position in round 1. I think that's probably the best approach, is to take a couple of dart throws at this and try to find a couple of guys that are able to cobble together the production that's lost in the Stefon Diggs trade.
And not only that, I do think that, as you kind of were saying, it's going to be difficult for them to get in that range. I mean, not only are these teams, most of these teams trying to combat these teams trying to trade for quarterbacks in that top range. So they're going to be willing to give up a little bit more, I would say, than you to get inside that top, I don't know, 13, 10. And let's just say, even if, a talent drops to number 10, you think the New York Jets are going to trade with you to help you out to try to find that wide receiver to replace Stefon Diggs? I just think it's going to be really difficult for them to kind of land on their feet here, especially at this point in the offseason. It's kind of a weird zone because you do have the draft ahead of you, but you're not really in the best position to get one of those stars, and free agency has already come and gone. I mean, I guess there's the Tyler Boyd route. There's the Odell Beckham Jr. route. There are some veterans still available, but certainly none to the level of Stefon Diggs. And I think that it would be a fool's errand to say at this point, as you kind of were mentioning, to try to replace Stefon Diggs with one player. It's not really going to be like that. But I'm not even really talking about Stefon Diggs. I'm talking about remaking their entire wide receiver room. Davis is gone. You have Diggs now traded. It just feels like there's not a lot there for Josh Allen in this offense to now contend with Aaron Rodgers coming back, with Garrett Wilson and all those guys that they have in that offense. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Those are going to be really difficult offenses to keep pace with, when really right now your top receiver is a tight end.
Yeah, I mean, look what they did last offseason, drafting Dalton Kincaid in the first round. Many thought that that was, kind of their way to combat what Kansas City is doing with Travis Kelce. If you want to get all the way up to, that top 12 range, RJ White of sportsline.com, somebody that you and I have worked with pretty closely over the past couple of years, has his own trade value chart. And he said that in addition to that number 28 overall selection, it's probably going to take a first round pick in 2025 to move up to number 11. And then if you want to move up even farther than that, it's of course going to take, potentially another first round pick, a second round pick, which now they have an additional in 2025. So it's going to take a lot to move up. And it's a matter of whether or not it's going to be worth it to trade up for one of those wide receivers. Because even at 11, you're not guaranteed one of those top three guys that are discussed at that part of the draft. I think one of the other considerations, does this become a team that is now interested in T. Higgins in Cincinnati? I don't know that Cincinnati's going to be willing to trade to Buffalo, considering their history in the playoffs. Do they show some level of interest in a Deebo Samuel or a Brandon Ayuk? Do they themselves look for a veteran on the market to perhaps bridge the gap a little bit with one of those draft picks that they are still almost assuredly going to walk away with, even if they take a veteran or even if they trade for a veteran?
I think that you make a good point there with the wide receivers that could be available via trade. Cincinnati would be tough because it's in the conference. They're still contending for a Super Bowl. But if things get tenuous with Brandon Ayuk, I could see that as a potential. Again, it's NFC, AFC. You could see that making a decent amount of sense. And just quickly, as we look at what this really means for Buffalo from a draft position, from financially, the Bills are going to carry about $31.1 million in dead cap money for Diggs. You got to remember, he signed a monster deal with them not too long ago. And as we mentioned earlier, you look at Josh Allen's most touchdown passes to wide receivers in his career. Number one, Stefon Diggs with 39. Gabe Davis, number two at 31. The next closest is Cole Beasley with 12 touchdowns. So the majority of his production as a passer has gone to those two wide receivers who are now out the window. All right, we covered what this means for Buffalo. Now let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll talk about what this means for the Houston Texans.
You hear that? It's the heartbeat of American soccer, and this rivalry is gonna get loud. The USL on CBS and streaming live on Paramount+.
So again, we covered what this means for Buffalo, and it kind of feels like they're in an awkward stage in their championship window of sorts. Now we look to the Houston Texans, who are kicking that door completely open in terms of championship window. And they're doing exactly what I think that they should be doing at this point. They hit a home run with CJ Stroud at the draft at number 2 overall last year, wins Offensive Rookie of the Year, looks like the next best thing in terms of bright young quarterbacks in the NFL. And what do you do when you have a bright young quarterback on a rookie deal? You do everything humanly possible to surround him with talent, no matter the price, because you're getting him at such a bargain. So Stefon Diggs certainly doesn't come cheap. He's 30. He's going to be kind of in the twilight of his career, but I ultimately think that this is a home run move for this franchise. What do you think?
I agree, and we've seen Houston's aggressiveness this offseason, showing interest in Keenan Allen. They were rumored to be one of the teams as a finalist in the possibility of acquiring him before he was traded to Chicago. So you're seeing a team that understands what they have at the quarterback position, understanding that they are potentially in a Super Bowl window here, and being aggressive with that. I think we've seen a couple of teams kind of be aggressive with the understanding that they have young quarterbacks that you have to support. Carolina, of course, Bryce Young did not have the same level of success as Stroud last year, but you've seen what they've done this offseason, spending a lot at the offensive guard position, trading for Deontay Johnson. Tennessee with Will Levis. They go out to get Lloyd Cushenberry, the top center in free agency. They signed Calvin Ridley, who was arguably the top wide receiver available in this year's free agency class. So a couple of teams really making moves with young quarterbacks, and you're able to do that when you have that cost-controlled rookie contract at the quarterback position before it balloons into that $50 million annually that kind of prevents you from spending at other positions. So I admire Houston being aggressive, understanding the situation that they are in. And now they have a very competent wide receiver room now with Nico Collins, who really burst onto the scene last year, was able to show his full potential. Tank Dell, when he was healthy and available, was one of the most explosive wide receivers in the NFL. And then now you've got Stefon Diggs to round out that room. I think it's a really good complementary skill set when you look at what they've got and what they've been able to build in that wide receiver room.
Yeah, I mean, you look around the league and you try to, when you look at these trios of wide receivers, there's a chance here that this could be one of the best, if not the best. I mean, before he went down with injury, Tank Dell was like a fantasy football darling. He was just an absolute beast. It was part of this wave that the Texans have brought on in that draft a year ago. You talk about Stroud, you talk about Tank Dell, you talk about Will Anderson, and this has really been a seismic offseason for them because, as you kind of noted, they do recognize the position that they're in with, a second year head coach in D'Amico Ryans, who was able to put all the pieces together and win that division. Stroud certainly bursting onto the scene as, at one point, a borderline MVP candidate. And now you go into this offseason, you acquire Diggs most recently, but you go out and acquire Joe Mixon via trade. You get Danielle Hunter. Just you go down the list of what they've been able to do. I think that they're the favorites in that division, certainly against the Jaguars. And that once we get to training camp and once we start talking about season-long futures, they're going to be the sexy team to win the Super Bowl. I don't think that there's really any doubt about that.
No question. And I think when you talk about the level of talent that Buffalo could possibly get at number 28 overall, or maybe even into day two, the same has been a consideration for Houston. They understand that there is a drop off in ability once you get to that stage of the draft. So they weren't able to find a Stefon Diggs in round two, the way that Cleveland was not able to find a Jerry Jeudy in round two. That's why these teams get aggressive. They see an opportunity to maximize their championship window and they go get players, because with the way that the wide receiver market financially is expanding, guys like Jerry Jeudy getting $17 million a year, I believe over the next 4 years, Stefon Diggs is under contract. He's getting like 77, 78 million, somewhere in there. So less than $20 million. If you're getting a level of production that is similar, comparable to what we have seen over the past couple of years, that is a steal. I mean, that's cheaper than Calvin Ridley. So it is a little bit of a risk when you have a almost 31-year-old wide receiver. But if you're able to achieve that level of production that we've seen from him, then they're going to be getting a steal, and they're going to be a team that is very much in Super Bowl contention and a threat within that division.
And you look at what they've been able to do over the last couple of years here in terms of, under Nick Caserio being able to draft and develop. I think we're looking at it this year too. They still have the number 42 overall pick in the second round, and they also have another second round, number 59 as well. It's not, because I think people will say, oh, they lost their second round pick this year. No. That's in 2025. This deal doesn't really impact them too much in the 2024 NFL draft. I think the only pick that's going to them this year is a 6th round pick that's going. Oh, I'm sorry. They acquire a 6th round pick. So again, it doesn't really matter to them as well. What do you think that their needs are now? Because we're talking about them loading up at wide receiver. They've obviously made moves for Danielle Hunter. They fixed the backfield with Joe Mixon at that number 42 spot. And even if you want to talk about both those picks in the second round, what is something that Houston should be looking at on day two there as they start their NFL draft?
Yeah, I'll give you an ideal scenario. Number 42 overall, you get a defensive tackle. You get Braden Fisk from Florida State, Chris Jenkins from Michigan. One of those guys that can kind of give you more depth, more juice along that interior defensive line to pair with Will Anderson Jr. and now Danielle Hunter, who they signed in free agency. I think that would be an ideal situation. They showed interest in Eric Armstead before he eventually signed with Jacksonville. And at number 59 overall, I think if you can get a cornerback, you get a Max Melton from Rutgers, you get a Kamari Lassiter from Georgia, addressing two positions of need on the defensive side of the ball, I think is an ideal outcome for them in this draft class. And what trading that 2025 second round pick allows you to do is to use those second round picks this year in a way that benefits you now. So just another example of how this team is doing everything that they can and setting themselves up to capitalize on the window that they have currently, irregardless of the future and the ramifications that come with it. They see an opportunity. They see an open window. They're jumping through it. That's what Houston is doing. And I think every team has to take note of that, because what they showed last year was just the beginning. I mean, now you've got CJ Stroud in year 2 of his rookie contract, year 2 in that offensive system, and you've now given him Stefon Diggs. So a team that is making moves to win right now, and they're acquiring the talent that's going to allow them to do so.
And we talk a lot about, we're talking a lot about the moves that they made. Obviously, we're breaking in here because of the Stefon Diggs trade and what that means for CJ Stroud. I think one of the more underrated things that happened with Houston this offseason is the fact that they were able to retain offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick. the fact that you can keep that same voice with CJ Stroud going into year 2, and there's not this change at offensive coordinator, there's a change in the voices that he's hearing and somewhat in even just small tweaks to the system, that is so massive for the development of a young quarterback to have some consistency. I thought it was one of the more underrated coups that they were able to keep him in Houston, not lose him to a head coaching job, because I believe he had at least a couple of interviews, or at least he was rumored to be, gaining some steam as a head coaching prospect. And if they continue on this ascent, what we think that they could do now that Diggs is in place, and if they have another strong draft, as you mentioned, and they identify some things on day 2, you could see a lot of these coordinators get picked off as head coaching possibilities, and Slowick's certainly one of them. But as of right now, they are sitting pretty heading into 2024. And I was just pulling up some of the odds here, what they could, where they stack up in terms of the rest of the league. They're tied with the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys at 17-1 to win the Super Bowl. They're still looking up at teams like the Bengals, the Bills, the Ravens, the Lions, 49ers, and Chiefs, obviously. But you put them right in that kind of window. I mean, you're in a division where you should be able to pile up some wins. You'll probably get a home gate if you win that division. And I'm just pulling it up quickly. They might not even be up at this point, but the AFC South, if it's there, yep, they're still the favorites. They're actually plus 115 to win the division. Jaguars plus 240. I kind of like that number at plus money. Houston Texans at this point, what they've been able to do, to me, I really am bullish on them. I think that they're going to be, I don't know if Super Bowl is definitely the play there, but boy, at that number, 17-1, I don't know. I kind of like them better at Dallas than this point, right?
Yeah, I agree with you, because this is a team that has shown that they are capable of rising to the occasion. Stephen O has sent out his reports on how this trade kind of impacts the overall win-loss record of these two teams. And Houston, with Stefon Diggs, now has a 0.5 game, towards their overall win-loss record increase. So before, they were supposed to win 8.7 games without Stefon Diggs. Now with Stefon Diggs, the projection is 9.2 wins. So you've seen that level of increase already. And I think with the talent that they've acquired elsewhere, Daniil Hunter, as we mentioned, the additions that they made to the interior defensive line, this is a team that has filled some of those weaknesses on their roster. And they already showed that they are capable of competing within that division. Now you've got Jacksonville, who is looking to bounce back with Trevor Lawrence this year. You've got Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis. So there's going to be some other teams that have a say in this ultimate divisional outcome. But for my money, Houston has got to be the favorite heading into this season because of what they've already shown in such a short order of time. And CJ Stroud, you saw him take ownership of that offense over the course of the year. The second half of the season, he was more and more comfortable with what they were trying to do. Every year, teams go into the bye week and they assess what is working, what is not working. They make adaptions, and they make a run towards the second half of the season. Now that you've got a full offseason with CJ Stroud, where he's not doing pre-draft workouts, interviews, everything that comes with the pre-draft process, being able to have that open dialogue with your offensive coordinator and just say, hey, this is what I'm comfortable doing. This is what I didn't think worked for us. That level of dialogue after a year spent together is going to benefit them immensely. And I think they have to be viewed as the favorites in that division.
And quickly here, we're just talking about some of the odds. I just pulled up MVP at a variety of different books, and Stroud is about 10-1, 11-1, and it's really only looking up at Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes. And if we just look at Josh Allen, I'll look at FanDuel. Josh Allen is plus 750 to win MVP, second best odds at the moment. Now, I'm sure these will change following the news of Stefon Diggs, but boy, Stroud is a much better bet, in my opinion, than Josh Allen. And sure, if Allen still wills his team to a division title or something along those lines, in spite of losing all of his receivers, that narrative will surely help him get votes. But boy, 10-1, 11-1 right now for CJ Stroud, I think is pretty fascinating. But before we get out of here, before we wrap this up, let's grade this trade. I already had to grade it for the site. I gave the Texans an A. I gave the Bills a C-, I believe, just because if you're talking about, like I was saying earlier, the reason why I give them a low grade here is because it felt like this was coming at some point or another. And you didn't really prepare as well as you could have for this inevitable departure. So that to me is why I think it's a tough spot that the Bills find themselves in. Meanwhile, the Texans, you go all in, you're doing the right thing by bringing in a star receiver while you still have Stroud on his rookie contract. What do you think?
I would give the Bills a B, which is more of an incomplete because I think there is part of the story that we do not yet know. I do think there is opportunity for them to use this new draft capital that they have acquired to, better suit their interests moving forward. Whether that means trading for a veteran or making a move in the NFL draft to get a player that's going to, pick up some of that production lost from Stefon Diggs. From Houston's perspective, I give it an A. Knowing where you are as an organization, having the self-awareness to know that you exceeded expectations this past year, you've got the talent on both sides of the ball to really make a run at a Super Bowl this year. Having that self-awareness, I think, is incredibly important as much as it is for the bad teams that maybe don't have the self-awareness that they're not going to compete. So I admire what they did. I think it was something that they had to do, something that the fans are probably really excited about. And I think all of that combined makes this a home run decision for Houston and what they're trying to accomplish for the upcoming season.
Yeah, we're both in agreement, both giving them A's there. I'll just play devil's advocate quickly before we get out of here. Diggs is a 30-year-old, almost 31-year-old wide receiver who did fall off down the stretch, averaging 51 receiving yards after the first 6 weeks, where he was, over 105 of his first 6 games. There should be some concern there, right? You're owed to him a lot of money. He did kind of fall off. He couldn't make it work with a guy that we just said had the second best odds to win MVP. So, as much as we're giving this, as much praise as we are, let's also just say that, hey, there is a sliver, there is a possibility that something is falling off with Diggs. Now, there was something I remember earlier, or midway through last season, Justin Reed from the Chiefs was saying that we're not even double coveraging Stefon Diggs. So, you have players kind of throwing shade at him, whether that's just a rivalry, just kind of throwing elbows just for the sake of throwing elbows. That remains to be seen. But I do think an engaged Stefon Diggs in an offense where there are now multiple receiving options, whether you talk about Tank Dell, Noah Brown, you go down the list, Nico Collins. There's a lot of options
that
there.
Could ultimately be a bad thing too, though, that they do have a lot of options at the position. That still remains to be seen, but that'll be an interesting dynamic.
You're talking about a guy that wants his targets, and with a lot of mouths to feed in Houston, it's going to be interesting for CJ Stroud and how they make all that work. We think it's a good trade. We think it's going to be very interesting for Houston as they look to go back-to-back in the AFC South division. Meanwhile, the Buffalo Bills have a lot of work to do to reshape that wide receiver room. Josh Edwards, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube when you're listening to the podcast, wherever, Apple Music, Spotify, anywhere. Make sure you subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and we'll talk to you soon.